So, welcome back to another episode of Tapping into Life. And boy, am I excited for this episode. And I think you're going to get a lot of great takeaways from today's call. So, I am so fortunate to be here with an author named Monique Verpoort, who has written this amazing book called Is This All There Is? And we're going to dive into this book today. And I am so excited to learn more about this amazing book. But I want you to also know, and if you're listening to my podcast or you're also a new listener, I welcome you to Tapping into Life, because this is all about tapping back into ourselves through our mind, body, and soul. And this conversation that we're going to have today is right aligned with that. So you're going to want to stay tuned, stay for the whole conversation. This is going to be on YouTube, and you can also listen on Apple and Spotify. So my beautiful guest, Monique Verpoort, is an author. She is a supporter of mankind, or humankind, I should say, as well as women, really specializing in supporting women. And she is a tapping enthusiast. So I am so honored and grateful to have you here with us today, Monique. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Brenda. I'm super excited to be here as well. And to be with a fellow tapping enthusiast is always a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have.
Yes, absolutely. It's so great to be able to share. And, we all have probably a bit of a different story. So why don't we just dive right in and let's talk about, learning a little more about yourself and, how did you start on this journey?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I'm recently retired. So that's the first thing I want. Yeah, it's been less than 2 weeks. Yeah, it is. So this is a new chapter for me as well in this next part of my life. But my interest and passion has always been in the field of mental health. I've just come out of a 20 plus year actually career in children's mental health.
Wow.
And have previously worked in sort of the field of social work and child protection. And prior to that, so the interest for me has always been about sort of healthy families has been a key thing. And I guess the passion continues to be there. A lot of us struggle in this day and age, and there's a lot of unhappiness and just people wondering what's life about? The age-old question: what is life about? and how can things get better? And so I have really been drawn to sort of finding tools and things that can help myself, because it often stems from where we find ourselves first, right? We're trying to find these answers, and I certainly was and have been and continue to be. But to really try to understand how can I, as one person, support others, and how I can sort of share what works for me with others. And that has been the driver of my passion, and continues to be, even in retirement. Not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but that will definitely be where I put my energy and my focus moving forward. So,
wow.
Yeah,
That's so
I think that's
exciting.
Yeah. And I've been in a relationship for almost 35 years, and
Nice.
have a couple of kids from that relationship. And so a wonderful family. And I don't know what else to say. I love languages. So that's something else that is a passion for me. But
that's beautiful. And yeah, that gives us a good understanding. And, I'm sure you've seen a lot working in children's mental health over the years, how things have, evolved. Have you seen, we're going to get into tapping, but is that something you've seen in the, children's mental health area? Is that something they've been open to receiving?
Well, it's hard to say 100%, but I do know there are some organizations that actually are taking steps to introduce tapping to their clinical staff, which is really exciting. And I think the more that we have these models of how this can work within an organization, mental wellness organization, the more quickly this will start to catch on. That's really the vision. I'm hoping that this can just be something that is normalized, within sort of the standard clinical mental health services that we see today. And I think there is starting to be an openness because people are more, they're hearing more through things like the internet, through different influences. And I think there is an openness to, maybe we can look at this a little more closely because we have the evidence now, as you know, that supports the effectiveness. And I think that just by having the research to back up the effectiveness of some of these modalities in EFT tapping, which we're talking about today, I think that gives, leaders permission to maybe explore a little bit more in terms of how this, what the literature says, how this is helping people in that area of mental well-being and resiliency. So I am optimistic. It takes time. There's no doubt about it. But I am starting to see some indications that there is more of an openness today than ever before.
Oh, well, that's exciting. When we see that there's some opportunity coming, then that is very helpful. So yeah, I hope that happens too, because I think, we can all benefit from as many tools, no matter how old you are. It'll always be, very beneficial. So that's great. So let's learn about this amazing book. I felt called to read this book, Monique. I was like, wow, this title says it all. Is this all there is? And I'm like really curious, like, how did you decide to write a book?
Well, first of all, I love books, and I have read my fair share of self-help books over the years. So I have benefited enormously from the wisdom other people have brought to their writings. And I'm a very self-reflective person, and I just value sort of reading about others people's experiences, what's worked, what hasn't. And so that was always something that was there that, and then in terms of writing the book, I thought to myself, you know what, this like hearing conversations of women around me and my own experience as a woman and a mother and a caregiver and all that. I just saw these patterns that I was hearing in conversations about women being really tired, exhausted, just feeling like life was this, this grudge, day in, day out, and not feeling particularly satisfied with their life, with how their life was going. And it was always the same. Like the pattern was all about, I'm having to look after, so-and-so, take care of so-and-so's needs. I don't have time for myself. I don't get to recharge. I'm always on call. I'm there to make people, my family happy. I have to be there for aging parents. I'm part of a community and I've signed up to be on the volunteer board and on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, we know that when we don't have a chance to rejuvenate ourselves and really listen and prioritize what we need to be healthy human beings, it does affect us on a multitude of levels. Health being physical health being a huge one. And of course, mental, emotional, spiritual, everything. And so I thought, you know what? I had this love of this tapping modality that had served me and so many people so well that I really wanted to get out there more in the mainstream. And I had these women who I could identify with very much. And I thought, this is a perfect pairing. How do we get women who are just so overstretched to give them a tool that can help them, first of all, stay more regulated in the moment? And just by using this tool gives them this certain amount of time for themselves to be able to calm sort of what's going on in their bodies, their nervous system, and also just start, exploring and challenging these conditioned beliefs that we pick up in society about our role as women and the expectations that are put on us to look after everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And we just absorb this, not just from our upbringing, but from society at large. This is how society operates. So how can we kind of give ourselves permission with the help of tapping, which we know, Brenda, really works with these limiting beliefs that we have about our roles as women and caregivers, and and how not to disappoint others, and we need to be there, and we can't ask for help, and we can't say no, and we got to make people happy. These are just some of the large pieces here.
Yes.
And with the tapping, it can help us to like break that down and go, okay, is this really true? Like, like who's telling me I need to say yes to everybody, and that everybody else is more important in terms of their needs than my own. And so it's a really great way to start to deconstruct that, and then reframe in a way that makes more sense for our own personal well-being and our authenticity, in terms of who we are, what we want, what we need, and what gives us more life satisfaction and joy ultimately, is really so. To go back to your question, is this all there is? It's often we're asking ourselves, come on, there's got to be more to life than just this list of duties and obligations, that I need to take care of. And at the end of the day, I'm spent. So let's try to look at, what could life look like if we set up some healthy boundaries where we actually do prioritize what we need. So the subtitle, is this all there is living a life beyond obligation. So what does life look like if it's not just about being obliged to, do X, Y, and Z for everybody else? It's a bit of a long answer to your question.
No, it was perfect. I loved it all. And I wanted to comment too that one of the beautiful things I loved about your book was all of the testimonial stories that you had. And it was, I think I could relate to them all. Like I could see there, honestly, I just needed to take out that name and put Brenda in there because it was very relatable. But I think too, for people picking up your book, Monique, it's that opportunity to see like, wow, like I'm not alone. Like oftentimes we have these thoughts in our head and we think, oh my gosh, like I'm probably the only one who thinks this way, like nobody would ever be thinking this crazy or, taking on all of this. Like I remember I never even thought, like, I didn't even know about people pleasing, but I am a master people pleaser. Like I have the awards, I have the t-shirts, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can fit into all of these different categories. And, we weren't really talking about this probably 10 years ago. So it's really refreshing to have something to look at and read and be like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. There are other women that are struggling in the same way. They're trying to manage everything. They're trying to figure out, how do I, have a fulfilling life? I mean, how do I find life balance? Like that's a pretty heavy loaded question. I mean, I think there's a lot more openness I find now about having, personal development and learning how to support ourselves. I mean, now we're finally talking about caregiver burnout. Like there's, this is a real thing. I mean, people are burning out because they're caring for, it could be a partner, it could be, a parent. And I'm hearing more and more that people are taking care of their parents. They're like, living longer and they're ailing, but they're just on 24/7. And they're now getting quite ill as a result of dealing with, they don't know, they can't step away. It's like, if I'm not there, there was somebody I knew who she couldn't go to the hospital for a few days. And then her dad was was deteriorating as part of the process, but took on that ownership of like feeling that responsibility. And I would say that's not an isolated situation. I think that we are more and more, falling into that. a lot of the support services people can't afford. So we're kind of needing to fall into that role. And it makes it, yeah, it makes it really challenging. So I think, one of the things that was really helpful for me is to know we're not alone. And then you provide so many great tools, with the tapping, but, to support us in figuring out, yeah, is this all there is? Because it can at times, and I've been feeling this at different times in my life, is this all there is? And it can feel really defeating if it's like not in a good place when you're in a low energy. So yeah. So you were talking a lot about the title. Is there anything else you want to add about how you came up with this great name? I loved it.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm glad it resonated with you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can say I won't say every day, but I have asked myself that question. Is this all there is?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it just feels like you're just going through the motions, of
Yes.
going through your daily life, and there's sometimes not a lot of that word joy. I like it, but I find sometimes it is sometimes out of reach, So I
Yes.
use it. I use it hesitantly, because
Mhm.
sometimes for many of us, it's like getting through the day and being okay at the end of it. We're not necessarily joyful, although
That's
that is
right.
the place that we would aspire to be. So I think just being content, and satisfied,
Mhm.
and feeling good about what's going on in your life. And so that is the first thing. I think that's a very, and I've asked people in a workshop. I said, have how many people have said that to themselves? Is this all there is? And a lot of hands went up in the room.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
don't think I think that it is relatable in terms of people kind of feeling that dissatisfaction. Um, and yeah, I think that's really how it came to me. Just like I said, trying to, just hearing people's stories, and it
Mhm.
confirming that this is not an exception, that
Yes.
somebody
Yeah.
be feeling that. And,
Yeah, and I like too that, it's probably something that people are thinking inwardly, but they're not
mhm,
actually saying outwardly. And
mhm,
this is creating that opportunity to have this conversation, right? Is that, it's sort of like, wow, like I didn't really want to acknowledge it. Like I didn't want
mhm.
to know,
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, like I'm just kind of going along with the flow here. But yeah, it kind of, it makes you want to look at like, could I have more? And I think I was listening to another great podcast, Mel Robbins, and she had a gentleman on who is a specialist in happiness. And one of the things that he talked about was it's really being like enjoying the moments, because if we are working to get to this happiness, this joy,
Mhm.
we're never going to get there. So it's more like enjoying these moments, like being with your children or being with, your partner or whoever you're caring for, and having, it's more about that present moment. And I know we're going to get into talking about tapping. But that's one of the ways I think this tool helps us to get back into our body and get grounded, because when we have that busyness going on, it's really hard to get into that beautiful calm energy, right? So,
Mhm. Yeah, totally agree with that 100%. The presence of the moment. And I would just add with that too is being very conscious of sort of our thought processes. So
mhm.
that if we're in the present with someone, we're not thinking, okay, about your to-do list in the back of your mind, or I should be, I should be spending my time more wisely because I have so many things to do, and allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to be in that moment, totally present in the moment, without the the monkey mind scolding you for taking that time to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and a nice reminder that we need to do that and not be thinking about, oh, when I leave here, I got to go grocery shopping and all the things like in the future, or yeah, or we're kind of sticking ourselves back in the past, and we're missing a lot of beautiful moments if we become more present. So
Mhm.
yeah, no, that's a really important point. So let's dive into a little bit about how did you learn about tapping?
Hmm. Well, I learned about tapping, I think like a lot of people, the internet. And when I was in my position, they were about, I would say
So,
maybe 12, 13, it's probably 14. Time is going by so fast, who knows? But over a decade ago, I was speaking with a colleague and she actually said, oh, she had gone to a workshop and it was something called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. Tell me more about it. And so she told me a little bit about what it entailed and
Lovely.
how she had found it to be a really powerful experience. And at the time, I was very aware of EMDR, which is sort of the
Hmm.
sister to EFT.
Yep.
And so working still with, the right and the left part of the brain. And so I was intrigued and Googled it. And then, of course, fell on to a bunch of things like, the Tapping Solution website, which is one of the first things that kind of pops up. And anyway, on and on. And I started reading Gary Craig, the founder of EFT. Gary Craig was had this website with all these testimonials that had worked in all different ways for people. And it was almost
Mhm.
too good to be true. Though at the mantra at the time was try it on anything, because the whole thing was that at the bottom of a lot of physical and emotional ailments is stress. And so stress is a driver of a lot of these, things that present as symptoms. But when you can diminish the stress, you can have these really great benefits with the tapping.
Mhm.
I was fascinated by these stories and all these testimonials, and then there were like thousands of them, and I thought, okay, there's got to be something here that is true with this. So of course, I started experimenting with myself and had that first experience of sort of calming down, and then, as you know, when you tap, you're releasing sort of the stress within the nervous system, or the energy, the negative energy as well, and then the release with either the tears or the yawning. I'm a huge yawner.
Me too.
Yeah, and it was like, okay, something is happening here, and so I just I think it was curiosity
Mm.
and then experimentation, and then I got into it further and I had a completely transformational experience in a
Yeah.
workshop with Nancy Forrester's nephew. And we were talking about, I guess, the way people process information. And I remember hearing her talk about, some people, their brains work more rapidly than others, others
Mhm.
slow. And something about what she said resonated very deeply with me, because I realized in that moment that I had a lifelong belief that I was stupid. This was
Mhm.
one of my defining, it was like a quality. This was one of my personality traits. I was stupid because
Mhm.
I process information differently than other people who are, if you ever watch Jeopardy and you see how quickly people answer those questions, it's like, by the time they've answered it, I'm starting to kind of, think, what was that question again?
Yeah.
So that played out in school in a big way. And so I had come to that conclusion about myself, that this was it. And
Mhm.
when we were asked to break up into little dyads and tap on whatever it was we wanted to tap on, I did that one. I'm stupid. And long story short, Niagara Falls, just the release of emotion in that 20 minutes
Mhm.
or whatever it was. I mean, it's quick. It can be quick, not always,
Yeah.
but it can be quick. And in my case, it was. And it was the collapse of that belief. And it immediately impacted the rest of my life, because all of a sudden I didn't feel I was stupid anymore. I had brought it up
Yes.
from the subconscious and I cleared
Yeah.
it. And that was so empowering. Um,
Totally.
yeah, so that was one thing. And the other thing, I was working with people and I was witnessing other people's experiences and hearing about them and going, okay, this is just crazy. Like
Yeah.
this is not supposed to work this fast, right? Because it's psychotherapy, right? Yeah, I mean, you have many, many, many sessions to advance,
Yeah.
a little bit. And here, people were having these breakthroughs, and it was just an incredible experience. Miraculous in my mind. So it just fueled the passion and the curiosity, and then I became certified as a practitioner in it eventually, and and hence the book was sort of the next phase, because I really wanted this out into a mainstream population where other people could really alleviate their suffering, but more importantly, also experience a more joyful, contented life. And that was the impetus really behind writing the book.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is so beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing your story, because I always love hearing, first of all, how people learned about tapping and how it's impacted their life. And that is such a transformational,
Yeah.
empowering moment. Like, wow, I can relate to that limited belief of not feeling smart. I had something similar as well. And yeah, it's amazing. You feel like a different person.
Mm-hmm.
You've been carrying around, not even realizing it's almost like you're carrying this load of, a backpack on your back. And, it's like, wow, I kind of I feel lighter. Like I don't think I
Mm-hmm.
lost any weight. Like it's amazing, this emotional energy, how much it can just weigh us down. So, wow, that's so powerful. And so here you are,
Yeah.
and oftentimes people try things and they're like, yeah, I don't know. And then so you've been sticking with it for a long time and then got motivated to write a book. Like that's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
That's really
Mm-hmm.
great.
Definitely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's such a powerful modality that, and it looks strange, as we know, and it looks like, how can tapping on your face do anything? But it's,
I know.
I'm hoping that there is sort of a curiosity of, hey, you know, how can this actually do anything for me? And that people will give it a go, because it's once you kind of have the experience of it, then you
Mhm.
want to perceive it, and it either resonates with you or it doesn't. A lot of people it doesn't,
Yeah.
a lot of people it does, but try to find out, which camp you're in.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And, I love too that, as you were saying earlier in the call, that there's evidence, there's research.
Mhm.
And I love that, because we're sort of learning different ways to support people with their variety of different needs, right? If we're neurodiverse, I've noticed that tapping, actually tapping on the pressure points is a little bit too much stimulation. So even just pressing and releasing can make such a difference. And I was working with somebody last week and they couldn't do the tapping. But as soon as we just pressed and released with the breathing, they were like, wow, this is like unbelievable. Like I've never felt this kind of release so quickly. And so it's so interesting, as we're learning how things can be adapted right in the moment, per person to person, depending on their needs. And that there's so many ways in which we can use this tool, which is so amazing. It's not just tapping and breathing. There's so many other things we can do with it. So
For
yeah,
sure.
it's such a gift. Um, so I'd love to dive into your book and have a
Mm.
conversation about some of your great things that stood out for me, which I think, what our readers will probably, our listeners will probably really appreciate. So
Mhm.
there was a part in the book that you had talked about, and this was in the chapter. I'm just going to make sure I have the right chapter. Yeah, this was really hit home for me. So, this was reinventing yourself and what is possible for you. What a great chapter. And there is a part here that really stood out. It's sort of like you have to, what you have to do to take the next step. And I think that this is can be very challenging. I know I've had my challenges with this for sure. If like I know I need to take a step forward. I know I need to do something differently. But, this fear is just, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. It's like just taking over the whole thing. Like I don't even know where to begin. And there's this beautiful question that I've highlighted here. Um, what advice would I give my younger self? I love that. And I would love to talk a little bit about like how would you suggest, for the listeners to start that conversation with their younger self?
Mhm. Well, first of all, I want to say, I mean, I did not create that saying, so
Yeah.
I can't take full credit for it, but it is something that I think is really helpful when, first of all, we can kind of look back on where we have come, how far we have come
Mhm.
in our lifetime. I mean, if I look back as myself as, teenage Monique, the most insecure teenager on the planet.
I was
um,
there
in
too.
you're there too. I think a lot of us were, and sort of all the fears about being seen and being visible, and trying to find your way in life, and feeling like you're never really, quite, caught up, right? And you look around you, and I think a lot of us have the comparison thing where we're
Mhm.
measuring ourselves and our worth, regarding how somebody else is doing along the road, and so on. So I think all those, insecurities definitely weigh heavy on the psyche.
Mhm.
And it's not like once we get out of teenagehood, adolescence, all of a sudden like we're cured of all those insecurities. I mean, a number of them, yes, but there are others that have become core beliefs just because we've
Mhm.
experienced them for so long that can carry us through adulthood, excuse me. So one of the things that I find really helpful is when I'm in that place of insecurity where, as you said, there's fear holding me back, or maybe
Mhm.
taking a risk or doing something a little bit different. It doesn't have to be a
Mhm.
huge thing. It could be picking up well, we don't really pick up phones anymore so much, but, contacting, somebody
Yeah.
else that you want to maybe partner with in maybe a business opportunity, or just, it could be anything, right? Is when you're in that place of vulnerability, because we're often feel very
Mhm.
vulnerable and insecure, not always feeling super confident, is like looking back and looking at all the choices you've made along the way that have propelled you to where you are today. And I think when we do that, we can really start to see like this pattern. Wow, where
Mhm.
in the past have I been afraid, but I actually took a step that brought me to,
Mhm.
the next level. And then how did I survive that? I mean, did I survive it intact? I mean, was it a good thing? What was the? And often it is, right? It's something
Yeah.
that isn't such a big deal after you do it. So I think once you start to make an inventory of sort of all those places where you actually did dare to make a move, take a step, push yourself a little out of your comfort zone.
Mhm.
And then you can start to go, wow, like I've done so much in my life. And especially the older you get, your list gets bigger, right? It gets longer.
Yes.
And you look at it, you go, okay, like I've done this before. I can totally do this. And it gives you sort of that courage to go, okay, I've got this, I'm gonna do it.
Mhm.
What's the worst that can happen, if I take this or this action? And it kind of brings it into perspective, gives it
Mhm.
some levity. It's not it doesn't appear like it's such a big deal as it might. So that's one of the things that I like to do. And also knowing that, this whole thing around failure, first attempt in learning, right? That used to be
Mhm.
something that it was a lot of us, it was very scary. I mean, if you did something wrong or you didn't do it the way an adult wanted you to do it, you felt like your whole self-worth was wrapped up in that. Like if
Oh, yes.
yeah, right? Like if you
Yeah.
didn't, and it could be the smallest thing. And you know, this also doing a little bit of a reframe, and that this is like feedback. I always love that. This is feedback. If you take an action, it doesn't quite work out the way you thought. Okay, great. You'll
Mhm.
learn from it.
Yeah.
Next time you're going to do it differently, and we need that, and we need to do that. Allow our kids to do that too. A little plug for
Yeah.
for parents,
Exactly.
uh, right? That's how they learn, and that's how we learn.
Yeah.
So that's just sort of one of the things that I have personally found very helpful.
No, that's excellent. And actually, it was maybe 2 weeks ago, I was in this same kind of situation where I was going to a networking event and I had realized I need to, put myself out there more. And there was definitely this thought creeping in, going, I don't think we really need to go. Like, do we? No, we don't really need. But fortunately, the other part of me was like, no, we need to go. We need to go. But I noticed the nervousness was coming up, and I was running a little bit behind with getting there on, with the time. And it was a very casual event, and so that was kind of feeding into this other limited belief of you're not going to be accepted.
Mm.
And so thank goodness for tapping
Mhm.
because I was tapping, finger tapping on my way to this event. And I got there, and it's probably the best event I've ever been to.
Oh, wow.
It was amazing. Yeah, I met four amazing, like there were lots of women. It was a picnic, and we, were able to mingle. And I met four, actually five women, and I've had already connected with two of these women outside of the event. And I was like, see, if you hadn't have gone,
Mm.
you wouldn't have had this opportunity. But the beautiful thing, which I'd like to get into next, is about self-forgiveness and compassion,
Mm.
is that I found as I've been, doing my tapping on a regular basis, and I feel like I have a more calmer, more grounded, nervous system, that I feel like I can connect to these parts of myself a lot quicker and
Mm.
really bring awareness. And I think that's always one of the things I'm talking about with my listeners is the first step is becoming aware, right? As
Yeah.
soon as we can start to even just acknowledge that, we have this feeling, like, yeah, I'm feeling a bit of fear, or I'm feeling nervous, or I'm feeling anxious. Like, that's okay. Like, it's amazing if we can just start there and acknowledge it. But,
Mhm.
at first I was like, why do I feel kind of off? And then I sort of gave myself permission while I was tapping. That sort of settled it down. And then it came up like, are we going to be accepted?
Mhm.
And it's really been interesting as I've been uncovering these parts of myself that was a big part of me as a child, not getting accepted and feeling different and feeling like shy. So that whole shyness and protecting myself came out, right? It's like, I can't go out there because people aren't going to like me.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting how we develop these, core beliefs, and they become the direction of how we go in life, right? We're like, I can't join these community events because, I'm not going to be liked. And this was
Mhm.
something from when I was, 6, or, it could be younger or older, and it plays out until we, kind of give it some space to feel, attention and feel heard and loved. And yeah. So I was like, I love that question. And I think that's something, as we're on this journey of almost rediscovering ourselves, right? And learning, I think as women, and if you're, it's hard to know. A lot of my listeners are not mothers yet, but it's, I think, becoming aware of how do we, and you hear, there's a lot of women out there that are doing it quite well around, you know doing the balancing. Maybe they have more support, maybe they have, a good team on both ends, family, work, who knows. I think
Mhm.
that at the end of the day, we're humans, and we're all trying to orchestrate this journey of life. And I think giving ourselves that understanding of, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to have its ups and downs, and we're going to be challenged at times. But I loved how you talked about in chapter 6 about letting go of the need to judge and finding that forgiveness for self and others. And this actually has been, I would say, a fairly new, you know, concept for me to forgive myself. Being a master people pleaser,
Mhm.
I was always, apologizing for what I thought I had done wrong to everybody else,
Mhm.
and not actually forgiving myself. And recently, as I've been going through my own healing, there was somebody had said to me, have you actually written an apology letter to yourself? And I went, what? Like, I've written letters to other people and, in different relationships that I've had, but I hadn't actually written a letter to myself. And I thought, wow, like, you know what? Let me sit with this and process this. And, when I was ready, it was so, it was so fulfilling, so releasing, and it really did free me. And so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that whole self-forgiveness and letting go.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I'm thrilled that that process worked for you, Brenda. It's a really interesting idea that you're suggesting to your audience that worked for you. Yeah. Well, the way I really look at it is that self-love, compassion, and forgiveness, those three really go together. I think that it's being able to love ourselves for everything unconditionally. We talk about unconditional love for everybody else, but what does that mean for ourselves? It means for ourselves that we love ourselves no matter the flaws we may feel that we, carry around, or past poor judgment, mistakes that we made, maybe that hurt not only ourselves but other people, or not taking action when action was required. I mean, you name it. We can all find a gazillion examples for ourselves. And just to say, if somebody else was telling you the same story about things they had done wrong, what would we do? We would comfort that person and go, come on, Brenda, it's okay. You did the best you could in the moment, right? And
Yes.
and you know what? Everything turned out okay. Like, honestly, don't fret about that. Well, we need to do the same for ourselves and say, look, in that moment, that's what we did because that's what we thought was the way to do it. Or maybe it was out of fear, or maybe it was out of whatever. We had a good rationale in the moment for doing what we did or we didn't do. And so the self-love piece and the self-compassion is just saying, hey, you're not meant to be this perfect person. Like, if you were, you wouldn't be here. You might be some saint in the heavens, coaching somebody down here. Right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, it's all this stuff is to make us into, stronger, more resilient, beautiful human beings. And I think when we can just acknowledge that our humanity, and that, at the core, like, we have loving hearts and loving souls, and we're doing the best that we can. I think that really helps to then forgive ourselves for those so-called transgressions that we may be carrying. And, I'll give you an example of that too. I had for many years, I was really kind of stuck in my life, like in a career way in terms of what direction to go. And it was not clear for myself. And I realized recently, long ago, that I had been kind of criticizing and criticizing myself and badgering myself because I didn't know what I wanted to do in those moments, and I didn't realize how hard I was being on myself. And when I started doing that whole forgiveness work on myself, boy, did that ever clear up so much of that stuff. I literally forgave myself for each so-called transgression. The tapping helped immensely, and it freed me of this judgment. And so I think that before we can not judge someone else, we have to be free of judgment for ourselves. And then we just become compassionate people in general. And so I think really that it's so important. And it's really, I think, for any growth, any personal growth anybody wants to take on, that self-forgiveness and self-compassion has to be integral to that process, because it's really hard if you have that strong critic to actually
yes,
the way we want to grow.
Yeah, I agree like 200% with everything you're saying. Yeah, it was very interesting actually just yesterday. My dog, he's been dealing with an eye infection, and we went to the vet and they gave us the antibiotics, and that, was still kind of there, and the vet had said, you could probably go to the drugstore. And I looked up and I couldn't really find. So I went onto YouTube and found some natural remedies. The interesting thing is that I wasn't doing it correctly. And yesterday I was like, oh my gosh, this poor guy, he's not complaining, but it's not getting any better. And all of a sudden I went, wait a second, like I'm putting the tea bag on his eye instead of like putting the drops. So like, extracting the liquid. And this was like an aha moment, because the past Brenda, and not even that long ago, I'm going to be completely honest, would have had that inner critic would have really jumped up and said like, I can't believe you did this. Like, you messed this up. And instead, and this is something where our mentor, Nancy Forrester, shout out to Nancy, would say like, these are celebrating these little moments of joy, these sparks of joy. Is I was actually proud of myself because I figured it out. I figured out what was wrong, and I didn't beat myself up. And I was like, it's okay. We got it figured out. Like, that was the focus. That was where the energy was, as opposed to, oh my gosh, all this time you've done it wrong. Like, that didn't even come into the equation. So I was, thank you. Like, it was, and I think that I remember when I first started doing tapping and I wanted to become a practitioner and like, share this with everybody. I thought, oh, great. Like, it's, I'll do all this and I'll be good. Done, and it's like one and done kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, wow. Like, this is just like spirals of healing. And, when you were talking about the compassion and, the grace for yourself, the kindness, like it literally goes hand in hand, because you can kind of step back and look at things with a different lens. Like, you can see, oh, you know what? It's all good. It's okay. Like, I didn't do it perfectly. I'm not here to do it perfectly. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me as well with being a mother, and this is a shout out to all the moms out there, is oftentimes we're so busy, trying to teach, right? We're like, don't do this, don't do that, or we're, trying to provide opportunities maybe that we didn't have. And yet the more we model, I find we're giving them the best gift of all. And I think one of the things is me really just working on myself, showing up, really taking the time to put myself first. I'm now seeing my sons appreciating. They're like, Mom, you're inspiring us. Like, that is like massive in gold. Like, that is all the millions, like that just puts it all in perspective. So I think one of the things when we're looking at, is that all there is as a woman, when we start to figure out ourselves, it just opens up so many beautiful doors. And I think too, just at different times talking to people and they feel like the world is just so challenging right now. What would you say to those women out there around, if they're in a challenging situation and they're just feeling like, oh, I just don't know, like, how am I going to get out of this? I'm just almost in a rut, like I'm in this continual, maybe I can't leave my job because this is the only way I can make money right now. And yet I really want to do this other thing. So do you have any suggestions for those, listeners that could really, need that supportive encouragement?
Yeah. I mean, the example that you gave about being in a job and not wanting to be there, but that's sort of your economic sustenance. That is a toughie, because that is a reality. And some people just cannot. It's a very tough economic job market right now, especially. So if you have a job, a lot of us are happy we have, employment, but that is a bit of a tricky thing. But I think within that, it's, trying to make the best you can of that job. Sometimes it requires trying to find little challenges within the work you do that maybe can make it a little more interesting. If you're bored, if it's because of maybe the morale of the atmosphere can be a huge issue when you're working for a place and people just aren't nice to each other, or you're being disrespected. There again, often, boundary setting is can go a long way in terms of what am I asking yourself, what will I tolerate? What will I tolerate? What will I not tolerate? And how am I going to make people aware that, this is not acceptable? And that can be an extremely frightening position to be in, especially if it has to do with the person who's your boss or your manager or a colleague you share an office with. But starting to really think, how do I protect myself and make the most of this situation, and how do I set those boundaries? I think are super important, and I think that's where tapping can come in a big way, because you can really anticipate the fear that may come up in terms of this could be a very scary thing. There could be rejection, people ostracizing me because I've spoken up. Often that, this is the experience of a lot of marginalized people, that when they try to stand up for what's right, that it gets thrown back in their face. And for other people as well that are not in that situation. But, practicing tapping through the fear, rehearsing how you want to demonstrate those boundaries. And that's the beauty of tapping, is you can reinforce those neural pathways so you can take an action that is more empowered for you. And the tapping really helps with that. I'm a big fan of role playing, as well as that if you have someone you trust, that you can put yourself in that situation. You don't need tapping for that. And just, have that person be, anticipate what the outcome could be and how you can assert yourself in those situations. And that's something often can be really powerful. So that is for that particular situation you gave about being in a job. But once again, it's often doing a pros and cons list of, the action that you would take. What are the pros of staying in this position? What are the cons? And talking it through with somebody, right? Often when it's all in our head, it gets all muddled together, and we need to kind of vocalize what those fears are, get some feedback from someone that you trust. Some perspective can really help. You can get some ideas that you would never have thought of in a million years if you hadn't have asked somebody else. So I find finding a support team, whether that's one person, two person, three people, that can really help you work through that. I find that's always been a very effective thing for myself. And then once again, the self-reflection that you talked about, Brenda, what is maybe a core belief that is adding to your suffering in that moment, making that decision, because sometimes it's about changing that belief can totally change your experience of whatever situation you're in. So I think there's different ways that you can kind of approach that.
Yeah, I love all those suggestions. And I think that, they could be applied for, in many different ways. I think that is very helpful. And I think too, I love the point about talking it out, getting some feedback and getting a reflection, having, even if you don't have that go-to person, even having that journal that you can get it out, right? We don't want to keep it inside. We got to get it out somehow. And I think those are great ideas. And I find too, even with myself, is that, if we're feeling these patterns keep coming up, then that's, where we're like, the work is beginning to look at around, okay, so I still have this limited belief, that's okay, or it's kind of creeping up in a different way. And then I got this beautiful tool with tapping that I can use to support myself to just get grounded enough so I can even explore this. That's amazing.
Well, exactly. That's what it's all about, right? Because when we're in that place of fight or flight, and we're in that stressful situation, we can't access our thinking brain. We can't come up with good solutions to where we need to go. We can't even envision them because we're in that hyper stressed out mode, and we don't have access to the cognitive prefrontal cortex. So if we can tap just to get ourselves grounded, get us in sort of a more relaxed, calm place, we have access to more possibilities because we can see the options much more clearly.
Yeah, exactly. I love it all. It's amazing. So good. So I'd love to know, how can people, get your book and find you? Because I think everybody needs to get your book. So where are they going to find your book, Monique?
Any online publisher, so Amazon, Indigo, Barnes and Nobles. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty available. It's pretty available.
Yeah. Okay. And I will put that in the show notes so people can check you out and find your book nice and easy. And are you on Instagram or Facebook, any of those places?
I am on Instagram and Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how would people find you?
I think it's Monique Verpoort author is the Instagram one. And then Monique Verpoort EFT is the other one.
And what was the second one? It was Monique.
I think it's Monique Verpoort EFT. It's been a while since I've been up.
Okay, great. Well, I can put those in the show note if you're okay with that. And and then you never know, people might reach out if they have any questions about your book. Are you okay if people reach out and
absolutely
create a conversation? Yeah, and they may want to give you feedback, and
that'd be great.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And like you were saying, like at the beginning, is that you're like myself, a tapping enthusiast. I love that. I think that's if that's okay, I'm gonna use that.
Sure, go ahead.
Because I get so excited when I talk about tapping, and that's why it was so easy for me to come up with tapping into life, because it's not just about tapping, but really connecting back into ourselves. And I just want to say I am so grateful, and on behalf of myself and the listeners, I am so thankful that you've taken the time today to talk with us about such an important topic that we, especially as women, I don't want to center anybody out, but especially as human beings, we need to be able to ask ourselves this question, are we living, our true fulfilling life? Are we doing everything we can for ourselves? It all comes back to the self. And it's just been such a beautiful, enriching, and so many wonderful strategies you shared with us today. So thank you so much, Monique. And I look forward to connecting again. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Brenda. This was a real pleasure.